So, and how low would your calories get before you'd start ramping up?
I think the last time I got them down to probably about 2,300, 2,400 was probably the lowest.
At a body weight of what, 190 or 200?
Yeah, around 200. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it wasn't a lot of, I mean, I was training so hard at the time. Like, I was suffering. I was definitely suffering.
What's up, guys? Derek, moreplaysmarteats.com. Today we're going to be talking about Doug Miller, also famously nicknamed Drug Miller, which is, I didn't come up with that. A bunch of people sent it to me and said that is this guy's nickname apparently, which is, it's honestly funny even if it is or isn't true, because the guy looks sauced out of his fucking mind. So anyways, this is an example of his progression. So he has posted himself on his Instagram, some of his before and after shots and whatnot. Like, for example, this picture here, he says transformation challenge. Here's my 12-year transformation from my first to last competition. I know people will ask, so there is probably a 25 to 30 pound difference here. And obviously the second photo, it looks like more than 25 to 30 pounds to me. Like, this looks like 50 plus pounds. Like, this is insane, dude. So this is 12 years, and he's gone from looking like an average guy to looking like a freak, like literally a genetically blessed IFBB pro on drugs. So I kind of wanted to dig into some of his progression in the past and get a better gauge for how much this guy's been consistently progressing in a linear fashion without having any stalls, because in general, for naturals, you would gain a significant amount in your first year, a much lesser amount in your second year, a much lesser amount in your third year, and at the fourth and fifth year, you're kind of just, fucking chipping away and trying to squeak out another couple pounds of muscle a year if you're lucky. And, I wanted to see if that was representative in his development or not, and then get a better gauge if this guy is indeed Drug Miller or not. And I think the reason this is coming to light, like, obviously he's been a highly requested natty or not for a long time, but I think, his appearance recently on the Fouad Abiad podcast kind of like re-sparked the interest in this guy specifically, because he talks about, being a natty throughout the entire fucking thing pretty much, which is like, what else are you going to talk about? Like, obviously the like to dislike ratio is like not that good, and it's because a lot of people don't believe him, obviously. And throughout the entire podcast, it's like, what else are you going to talk about? Like, he's a pro natural bodybuilder, supposedly, and he's one of the best ones like ever. From what he looks like, he's probably one of the best of all time. So expectedly, the whole podcast is talking about natural versus enhanced, and this guy talking about how he steps on stage at like 200 pounds at 5'9", apparently.
And so, so maybe, 5 or 6 hours a week.
So he's talking about how much cardio he does for contest prep right now, as well as how many calories he eats, and then he gets into what his contest prep weight is.
Would be pretty much max.
So, and how low would your calories get before you'd start ramping up?
I think the last time I got them down to probably about 2,300, 2,400 was probably the lowest.
At a body weight of what, 190 or 200?
Yeah, around 200. Yeah. So, I mean,
so 200 pounds at 5'9", and the guy looks like this on the right. Like, how it's like hard to even wrap your head around, like looking like this. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind is this guy's arms are absolutely off the chain. Like, everyone knows that one random guy who has that one freak show body part, which is better than guys who are like on gear, like guys with reasonable genetics on gear. You might see the token natural who has like a standout body part. Somebody who comes to mind, Lex Little. His quads are absolutely unexplainable, and yet he is indeed natural, or at least for a significant period of time prior to his last powerlifting competition, where he maintained his strength and actually increased his strength during the prep process while he was being drug tested. So I pretty thoroughly analyzed and added additional biomarkers to check his natural status and ensure that he was not circumventing the urine analysis in some way, and everything checked out. So I did in fact conclude that he was natural, at least for a significant amount of time prior to that competition. Now, with Doug Miller, the problem is this guy is a pro bodybuilder in the, IPFA. I'll go through his progress pics shortly, but the IFPA has some interesting drug test protocols that I will kind of delve into after, and then we can revisit his natural status and discuss whether him being drug tested is actually a viable conclusion on his natural status or not. So anyways, this is him at 14 years old, looking like an average dude who's kind of lean. This is him at 18 years old. And frankly, we see a lot of guys at 18 years old nowadays who are more genetically blessed than this guy, who don't at 18 years old and don't end up looking like him. Guys who had better promise as an 18-year-old foundation and then ended up not exploding in the way he did, to the degree he did anyways. Here he is at 22 years old, and this is in fact the first competition I believe that he had posted on his own Instagram, and that before and after. Like, here's that black car, the BMW there. He's doing a most muscular, and here is right in front of that black car again. So 22 years old. So obviously he started lifting at this point. I'm sure he'd been lifting for a couple years prior to that, but let's just give him even the benefit of the doubt and say he literally just started and he already looked like this. Moving to his next picture, we have him at 24 years old. He looks like he's packed on, a decent amount of size. He looks like he's packed on probably, 10 pounds of muscle or so. Here he is, 24 years old, looking definitely more jacked than he was. Now, this is where things get a bit kind of ridiculous. We get to 26 years old, and this is what he looks like. So to me, this is exceptional. Like, this to me looks like what I would think peak natural would be for a guy who's actually dialed in. And he mentions how he's always been strict bodybuilder lifestyle, never really fucked around, never even did cheat meals or anything really off plan, except for the odd, go out with his wife and kind of like eat, sushi or something. But most of the time he's been regimented, like now as far back as in his, bodybuilding competing days. So the guy's never really off the mark in terms of being on point for making maximum progress. And he's always trained hard, and he talks about that, quite often. And it's kind of what he attributes his progress to, is his training intensity and adherence to that long term. This is what he's at 30 years old. So somehow between 26 and 30 years old, he's managed to pack on what appears to be another 10 pounds of muscle. I don't know, like, it's a different pose, so it's hard to say for certain. Perhaps he is exactly the same as 26. It's a little bit hard to tell, but in general, it looks like he's holding a fair bit more mass. Now, 35 years old, all of a sudden this guy is, now again, these are different angles, different shots. It's kind of hard to compare exactly, but it seems like the bulk of his progress was made between, like, it's been like linear the entire time, which is the weird thing. And this is where the red flags go off. Like, the guy at 35 years old and 39 years old, it's baffling how much of a difference this guy's made. So 22 to 35, he's packed on what he claims to be 20 to 30 pounds of muscle, 25 to 30 pounds, which seems like almost like selling himself short. I can't imagine, unless this guy's just got like Phil Heath muscle inserts where it's just full of fucking air and he weighs like nothing when he's standing there and he looks like he's 50 pounds bigger than he is. I don't know how you could have only gained, 25 to 30 pounds and gone from this to this. Like, this to me looks like the difference of 50 pounds. And so anyways, my kind of iffiness on this is in fact the 22 to 26 being, 22 to 24, you would think you'd see the majority of his progress. And he packs on what I think is representative of a natural amount of mass in that time frame. However, a genetic hyper responder with insane genetics would have put on the majority of their progress during that time, not continued to pack on another 5 to 10 pounds of muscle like per year. Now, again, he's saying it was only 25 to 30, so it's entirely possible that this guy's muscle inserts are just fucking hyper inflated and look insanely 3D, and he just linearly gained, like 2 to 3 pounds a year or something. But even that, once you're at like 28 years old or something, like, how much could you really expect to gain anything more than what you're at that time as a natural, especially when you hit 30 and endogenous hormone secretion is starting to decline? It's hard to wrap my head around, dude. So again, 22 years old to 24 looks natural to me, natural progression for sure. We get to 26 and I'm like, okay, this is like peak. You're not going to get any better than this at this point. What else could you do as a natural? You're basically eking out a pound a year if you're lucky. And then he somehow manages to pack on what appears to be another 10 plus pounds of muscle at least, 10 to 15 pounds at least. Now, again, maybe it just looks better on him. Maybe at 26 years old, this is an unflattering angle and he actually already looked pretty much like this, but I don't know, dude. It's this one is difficult for me to be like, you know what? Like, I'd like to give this guy the benefit of the doubt. Like, if we look at, I don't know, like Greg Doucette, for example. We always bring up, this is a good clip to bring up because it's one of the only clips showing right before natural shifted to unnatural. According to Greg, he is posing natural at 179 pounds in April 2009. This is very shortly before he embarked on his first anabolics course. So here he is standing at 5'6.5", if I recall correctly, at 179 pounds a week after his shoot, or a week after his competition. So you have to keep in mind, at the actual competition, he weighed 174.5 pounds. And this was like peak nattiness for him. And he is a genetic marvel. Like, this is a guy who became a IFBB pro and competed in the men's 212 division. And, you know, he's not a top pro, but the genetics you need to become an IFBB pro at all, they're like top, elite, fucking specimen genetics, you know? So he obviously, this is a good example, in my opinion, of like, okay, we have a gauge of a guy at 5'6.5", 174.5 pounds on stage. Now let's take the most elite genetic outlier that I can think of, who is like sort of in the range of, I don't know, like a good comparison that recently came up that I thought was worth bringing up too is Keon Pearson. So this guy, he was 178 pounds a one day out from the 2019 Olympia. And if you know this guy, you'll know that he's claimed natural up until this past year, where he then exploded and gained a shit ton of size. And this is, this picture in particular is him at one day out. Ignore the thing on the right there. So here's a good progression example. First at the Junior USA in 2017, 2018 Tampa Pro debut, 4th place Arnold Classic 2019, 1st at the New York Pro, and 4th at the Olympia. So he claims he was natural this entire time, as far as I know, and he did not get higher. His weight cap was 180 pounds. So he was showing up on stage at his absolute pinnacle at 178 pounds. And this guy is like the modern Flex Wheeler, you know, if not potentially better, you know, we don't fucking know yet. So you can see the progression is quite expedited compared to Doug Miller. Doug Miller, in fact, took like, what was it, 12 plus years or something to get to where he is at his peak. What was it? Yeah, 12 years. Whereas Keon, it almost does look more representative of, you know, a lot of people don't believe he's natural, and that's fine. I'm just trying to show what actual progression looks like for somebody who would plateau at a normal time. You know what I mean? Like, he starts here at 2017, makes a significant amount of progress to 2018, significant amount of progress 2019, late 2019, and then he's kind of at the cap of what he can possibly work with, and then he hops on the Sazawul and starts fucking, you know, exploding. Presumably, you know, obviously that could be a separate natty or not entirely, but anyways, this is like the cream of the crop of genetics. This guy is like potentially a future Olympian, like Mr. Olympia potentially, and at his absolute pinnacle of nattiness, he is 178 pounds on stage at roughly the same height as Greg Doucette, maybe slightly shorter. I think he's slightly shorter than Greg, actually, but his weight cap is 180, so he's in the 5'5" to 5'6" height cutoff, I believe, and he's, you know, perhaps, you know, around 5'6". So if you add roughly 7 pounds per inch, you know, and that's kind of the gauge that Arnold uses as, you know, what you can expect to, you know, be proportional wise in terms of if you were an inch higher, an inch taller than the next guy, then you could expect 7 more pounds of lean mass distributed throughout your frame to be representative of like a proper genetic distribution, I guess, for a natural. So at that point, we're looking at Doug Miller and we're comparing him to the weight of Greg Doucette and Keon at their absolute pinnacles, you know, natural. You don't have to believe them, whatever. On stage, we're looking at 174.5 and 178 at roughly the same height, maybe a little bit less for Keon. So if you add 7 pounds for each inch from Keon to Doug Miller, you've got another, you know, roughly 21 pounds to work with. We're looking at the absolute max, about 199 on stage for a guy with like equivalent genetics, like stage ready, 198, 199-ish. And Doug Miller claims he was 200. So does that mean, you know, he falls right into this and, you know, he's just a pinnacle of genetic specimens? You know, it's possible, sure. You know, it's not completely impossible, perhaps. One, you definitely can see his arms carry his physique. It's not like if he had that body part missing, is there anything else on his body you would say impossible to be natural? Yeah, I don't know, man. Like maybe his quads, maybe his back. He's pretty like well fucking rounded actually when you think about it, but his arms definitely overpower a lot of his physique. But I'd just be interested to see what his physique would actually look like with like normal arm genetics, and if people would still accuse him the same way. Because we do see guys like Lex Little who people just, even when they see the evidence slapped in their fucking face and scientifically dismantled to the absolute most thorough degree, they still don't want to believe it because they just can't wrap their fucking minds around it. So with Doug, is he sort of like the same as Lex perhaps? You know, it's not completely fucking impossible, although I strongly am inclined to believe so. So I'm going to give him, you know, at least the benefit of the doubt and kind of elaborate on what I would then look at next. And that is the testing parameters of the league he is in, because this is essentially what determines if the drug tests he passed are actually legitimate or if they're easy to circumvent and we can't really take anything away from it and actually definitely say and conclude, okay, you passed a bunch of comprehensive drug tests that thoroughly prove you're natural and there's no way you could have got around this otherwise. So when we look at his league, IPFA or IFBA, keep getting it backwards. So there's a couple different sites I found, and this is the most relevant one I could find. I also found this other one, and they kind of have overlapping rules, but I just wanted to kind of bring them both up because this one was nicer to look at, to be honest, and it had a big red thing on the epi-testosterone to testosterone ratio. Notably, the league he competes in has a testosterone to epi-testosterone ratio of 6-1. And if you know anything about USADA, UFC, any of the more stringent testing leagues, you'll know they deploy a 4-1 cutoff. And the reason being is that the likelihood that you exceed 4-1 and you have a UGT 2B17 polymorphism that makes you excrete less or more than the ratio, like it's highly unlikely that you're naturally going to exceed this ratio unless you are unnatural, you know? So the lowering to 4-1 is totally justified because you get you even get leeway with that based on the clinical data that I've seen, especially if you're an individual who has the UGT 2B17 polymorphism, which in Caucasians isn't as uncommon as you would think. In Asians, it's a lot more common. I think it's upwards of like 50+% have a polymorphism, but for Caucasians, it's much lower. I think it's about like 10%-ish, but that doesn't mean you couldn't be one of the genetic outliers who falls into this territory, into this category, and then, you know, urinates out a small amount of testosterone and can otherwise get away with a higher amount of exogenous testosterone administration. So we have a 6-1 cutoff though. You have a lot of leeway, dude. And the interesting thing I saw about this is you automatically get ruled as a positive with a excess of 6-1. So the league he is competing in, despite the fact that they do random testing and they do in-competition testing and whatnot, they don't have the funds apparently to do carbon isotope ratio testing subsequent to a broken T to E ratio. So what they did instead, from what I can tell, instead of lowering it to 4-1 and having a more sensitive test, and then subsequently administering the carbon isotope ratio test to see if somebody is indeed using plant-derived testosterone or not, they simply thought, okay, I'm gonna bump up to 6-1 in order to give more leeway, so then we can be like 100% certain that if a guy breaks this ratio, he's on gear and we don't have to even spend the money on the carbon isotope ratio test. Like that's what it looks like to me. This looks like a financial move that is motivated purely by the lack of resources to do adequate testing. And I don't blame them for it because a lot of leagues just simply don't have the funding to do elaborate, expensive testing. But it's a huge hole in the testing parameters that give a lot of leeway for bioidentical hormone modulation. So when I see the 6-1 cutoff being an absolute ruler of your positive or negative, I'm like, I would be thinking like, wow, if I had a polymorphism, I would have tons of room here, like tons, like upwards of 400 to 500 milligrams a week of room. If you're natural and you don't have a polymorphism, you have not a ton of room, but there's room, you know, especially with the 6-1. There's a reason why the UFC lowered it to 4-1. There's a reason why they do subsequent isotope ratio mass spectrometry. And it's because they want more sensitive tests to figure out if a guy is using exogenous T derived from, you know, a plant or if it's actually endogenous and they're, you know, just an outlier. So this, unfortunately, is no good, you know? Like for me, I see a lot of leeway here where it is basically saying, we don't have the funds to make this as strict as we could, and we also don't have a biological passport. So in addition to having a giant leeway in the T to E ratio, because we don't want to administer this, you know, relatively expensive test next, which to be honest isn't that expensive. Like, okay, yeah, I guess it on top of everything else, it adds up for sure. But I mean, if you wanted like comprehensive testing, you would lower this down and at least deploy carbon isotope ratio testing for anybody who exceeded this. That would be a bit, you know, more acceptable of a strict parameter. And then in addition to that, there's no biological passport. So there's so much room for manipulation of bioidentical endogenously produced hormones in this testing parameters with the OCB, NANBF, and IFPA, unfortunately. So when it comes to Doug Miller, I would have a hard time saying for certain this guy is not only passing drug tests that exonerate him entirely, but in addition to that, he falls within a weight amount at his contest prep that at his height is like reasonable to expect for a genetic phenom. Like, this guy is basically exceeding proportional Keon Pearson numbers as a white guy. Not that, you know, just frankly, white guys are less likely to be genetic phenoms in bodybuilding, it seems like. Not to be racist, I think it's just true. Historically, that we see the top guys at the Olympia. And, you know, that's obviously, I don't even think that's racist to say, because it's reflected even in our blood tests. You see modified EGFR numbers based on African Americans having higher levels of muscle mass. So I don't even think that's, you know, bad to say or anything. So anyways, everything kind of lines up where it's like right on the borderline of maybe this might be acceptable. And the physique in general, like, obviously doesn't look natural. There's a reason this guy is called Drug Miller. And like, no one really believes him, but his arms look absolutely like out of proportion as hell, and obviously heavily contribute to this, you know, speculation. If he had reasonable arm genetics, I'm sure he would get a lot less flack than he does now, because his contest shots are just absolutely freakish, dude. Like, I'm trying to, I guess these are more recent shots of him in his Instagram, but some of the, you know, the contest shots where he's at his peak, just absolutely absurd, dude, to the point where it's like inconceivable to think that he's not doing something, you know, even if it's not right at the contest, you know, up until that, I don't know. But all I can say is that when you compare guys with comparable, I don't know, like peak naturals who are absolutely at the pinnacle of the sport, and you compare their relative body weights, he's like barely within the realm of reasonable expectations for a guy who's like the top of the world in genetics. And then above and beyond that, the testing parameters of the league he is in are subpar for sure. So that is my conclusion. I don't think you can say this guy is definitely natural. He would need to do more to prove otherwise. And I think people are going to continue to, you know, speculate that he's unnatural, and I can see why. So let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. All the comments help the algorithm, and they're much appreciated. If you want to support the channel, you can check out anything I'm associated with in the video description below. My TRT clinic, it's all telemedicine from the comfort of your own home. Gorilla Mind nootropic formulas, Gorilla Mode pre-workout formulas to design myself from scratch, and anything else I am associated with, it's all in the video description below. Thank you guys for watching. Talk to you soon.